if someone begins to disengage, they don't talk as much, they're losing weight, or they're talking to you, but it's yes, no. Sometimes people lose the ability to make connection. I have seen in the clinic that some people stop brushing their teeth, they stop having a shower. Some people don't even take care of their hair because they lose interest in nearly everything that used to be fun to them. Then that is the problem.
So doesn't it mean that the person have actually slid into depression?
Yes, they're heading that way because they're disconnecting from, basic self-care, and some of them either eating too much or not eating at all. So any extreme can be a symptom. Again, we're very fond of, you gained weight, you're losing weight. Some of those statements need to slow down, Are you pregnant? What's going on? Very detailed questions like that can also be a spike.
Now, in the words of Stephanie Hutchins, an author, certified life coach, stress management coach, advanced wellness coach, a neuro-linguistic programming practitioner, also a yoga instructor, she once said, "Your pain didn't start with you, but it can end with you." Great. Now, next quote is from Laurel K. Hamilton, an American fantasy and romance writer, who once said that there are wounds that never show on the body that are deeper and more hurtful than anything that bleeds. Oh, wow. Now let's take our last quote, and this one is from Bath Wellness Retreat, Wellness and Meditation Center. I once said, "Heal so you don't have to give a sarcastic tone to uplifting messages. Heal so you never have to make anyone else the object of your own frustration. Heal so when someone tells you they love you, you may allow yourself to believe them." Absolutely spot on. I love this one. Now let's see how all of this could relate to what we'll be discussing today. Very warm greetings and welcome to The Conversation. We're reaching you from Kaftan's television studio here in the nation's capital of Abuja. Of course, I am Annabelle Oji. Now, mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It affects how we think, feel, and act. It also helps determine how we handle stress, relate to others, and make healthy choices. Mental health is important at every stage of life, from childhood to adolescence through adulthood. Now, on the other hand, mental illness, also called mental health disorders, refers to a wide range of mental health conditions, disorders that affect your mood, your thinking, and behavior. Examples of mental illness include depression, anxiety disorders, schizophrenia, eating disorders, and addictive behaviors. Meanwhile, we know that our parents' experience may make them who they are, and in turn, they make us who we are. But as it turns out, there's a biological and psychological component to how this happens. This phenomenon is known as transgenerational or intergenerational trauma. Without treatment, transgenerational trauma can continue to affect us, passing triggers from parents to child for generations. Now, understand what transgenerational trauma is, who is most likely to be affected, and why it's so important to get treatment. And that's what we're going to do today with my guest. Of course, she is Esther Abbah. She is a therapist. We're going to get right to this conversation. Don't miss this part. Join us again. Welcome back. If you just joined us, this is The Conversation. We're reaching you from Kaftan's television studio here in the nation's capital, Abuja. Now let's go straight to our conversation for today. Our guest on the show today is Esther Abbah. She is a therapist. It's good to have you on the show, ma'am.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Now let's get straight to our conversation for today. Anytime you talk about mental health or mental disorder, one thing that comes to a lot of people's mind is madness. Are there any connection or any form of connection between these two?
So I'm smiling at the word madness, which is you know the name and the representation that people from the Black community use a lot of the times. But I would like to debunk that word, momentarily. And I know it's come from a long time. And let's go back to what mental health really means. And a lot of times we use the definition that the World Health Organization uses. It is, according to WHO, the state of well-being which an individual is able to understand or realize their own abilities. And abilities can mean knowing your strength and knowing your weaknesses, and also a state where someone can cope with the regular stresses of life, like waking up,
Okay.
going to work, even though sometimes we don't want to do that. We wish you could stay in bed and life can still smoothly and bills can be paid. So that is the
How we wish.
definition of mental health. That's right. That's the definition of mental health, but it also is a state where an individual can function, and contribute to themselves and to contribute to their community. So when you say mental health, it doesn't necessarily mean that someone is unwell or someone is well. So it is like the umbrella term. So it's just nice to clarify that. Now, when you say you bring in the word madness or disorder, a disorder isn't it just doesn't become a disorder, it's a progression. So when you bring in the word disorder, then it means that this person has been unwell,
Okay.
unable to with regular stresses, have been unable to, be productive towards themselves and as a result to the society over a long period of time. So it
Okay.
does take time to become a disorder. So mental health, mental well-being can be considered as an umbrella term or a general term, but it would be nice that we bring the awareness to debunk the fact that when you say mental health, people run for the hills because we're afraid of the truth. So if you say to me today, how is your mental health? And I can say to you, it's good, and those two things, mental health and mental well-being, is a continuum. And what I mean by that is, you could be grand today, but if I get into a car accident, the next minute and my leg has to be amputated, my I will not be the same person tomorrow. And that's why it's a continuum, because every day brings its own troubles. And it is ability to maintain, a level where we can deal with, we can make sense of things and try to find solutions to them. That is the term mental health. So mental health, they're wide approaches. I suppose someone's running, out on the street naked already.
All right. So, can mental health or mental disorder be considered as a disease? And what class of illness is it going to be categorized into?
Mental health is a disease, and the disease is the disease of mental health. Your mental health is composed of, emotional, psychological, and sometimes it does transcend to, your body. Say, for instance, if someone is feeling depressed and they've been bedbound for a while, for a prolonged period, it nearly feels like, your muscles become weak. So what is happening in the mind is coming up. And I like to, some people say, oh, it's just the disease of the mind, it's all in your mind. It is not that easy. So I mean, from how I work and from my experiences, which sometimes is 2 cents, I would like to call it is a disease, and it is a disease of mental health. And whatever comes into that umbrella, your physical, your biological, your psychological, and your emotional health,
Mm.
it is, it's just say I have typhoid and I have malaria. It is a disease of the body. It is a disease of the body. And as much as this has a lot to do with the mind, of course, because the body is made of your physical, your body, your spirit, and your soul,
Mm.
what impacts one then tends to impact the other. So it is a disease, and it is a disease of mental health.
All right. Now, so what are those factors that are responsible for or that triggers mental health?
Now, there is no one or consensus as to what triggers
Okay.
mental, but we know that, the environment is a factor,
Mm.
life is a factor. And when I talk about the environment, for instance, based on the definition that we gave, I could be well able to make sense of things. I could be resilient. I could be positive. I could be hardworking. But when I put all this together and I do my own part to becoming, to meet the middle of what the society, the government, or the environment owes to provide to meet
Mm.
me to accomplish, and then that doesn't work,
Mm.
then the environment now is an impact on how I feel, because to a degree the environment has failed. Now, lifestyle comes under other diseases of the body, like, if someone's suffering from cancer, if someone is suffering from typhoid and malaria, if someone has been bereaved, if someone has been through tragedy, if someone has been through abuse,
Mm.
those that can impact an individual irrespective of, how hard they've worked, how resilient they are. And remember when I said mental health is a continuum, it
Mm.
is a continuum in that everything could be good today, and if tomorrow the environment changes, I mean, for people who live abroad, things like racism, discrimination, and
Okay.
lack of inclusivity are things that do and have the capacity to trigger mental health. So there is a long list of them. If someone has been abused, if say a young person becomes or has to fill the role of an adult earlier in life, you have a 12-year-old child having to mind a parent who is going through terminal disease, or a
Mm.
young child having to become an adult because the parents are unable to provide.
Mm. Now, here you reel out a lot of mental health disorder. Now, are there any connection between mental disorder and depression?
Depression is a mental disorder, it's a mental health disorder.
Okay.
So depression comes under, mental health disorders, mood disorders, schizophrenia, antisocial behavior disorder, and stuff like that are mental health disorders. And like I said earlier, you could say, oh, I'm not getting out of bed for a week. And, I often say to people and to clients in particular, you don't just go out and diagnose or self-diagnose. There is a procedure. Like I said, it's a prolonged, if I'm in a situation of lack for a week or two, as long as it regulates itself, that I get to a point where I'm able to overcome that hurdle, you cannot say that I am depressed, or it's not necessarily that I was depressed. It was seasonal. But if what is causing me the inability to get out of bed, the inability to function, stays for a long time, eventually it alters my mood. And what
Mm.
happens that everything you're feeling physically is what your brain is interpreting, the message that your nervous system is sending to the brain. You
Okay.
know, long period of time, things begin to alter. There is a term called neuroinflammation. and that's how your body reacts to stress, and you become anxious.
All right, now, so with all of these discussions about mental health, why is it so important to ensure it's sound and stable? Or why is it important that someone has to stay sane while we're having this discussion?
The essential reason why this discussion has to be had is that there have been so many misconceptions around the fact that mental health problems only exist in the Western world, that it is not part of the Black community, or it's a disease of the Oyibos, as a lot of people have expressed it. But you see, we all have blood, we all cry tears, we all have emotions of anger and sadness, we all laugh the same. And even looking at it from that very simple perspective says that what impacts one impacts another, because if you put the outer skin aside, then everything else biological is the same. So it is important to have these discussions, because a lot of people have symptoms of mental health problems, but do not understand or do not have the terms to classify it. So it would be a huge disaster, and as we see is becoming, to underestimate or to stigmatize the fact that that belongs to someone and not to me, say, for instance. So the essence of having this conversation is to make people become aware and to eradicate the stigma around it.
Okay.
So that if someone says, I don't feel well, I've been sad, you don't go and start telling them, or go to your pastor and pray. And as much as that is important, we have to look at the parameters to say, am I eating well? Am I an individual who is productive to myself and to the community? Are the circumstances surrounding me helping me to realize my dreams and my goals and getting me where I need to be? So for that reason, we have to talk about this, because truth be told, everything isn't smooth sailing around, and we can all come out well and smiling and laughing and all of that stuff. But when you go back inside, to the darkness of the night, that you're not where you want to be. And some of those things don't, revolve around you alone. And that way, so when we know what these things are and someone is expressing it to us, we don't cast and bind them, but we can then, stretch out a hand of support to say, how do we go about this? So the awareness to eradicate the misconceptions and the stigmas around it is a very necessary one.
Now, taking a cue from where you just landed, you talked about how we can help people who have these issues. Now, how can we actually identify someone suffering from mental health or mental disorder without them necessarily opening up?
So now let's talk about what positive mental health looks like. That an individual is able to make sense of things. And that doesn't mean there aren't issues or challenges, but we don't have a black and white vision that is either good or it is bad, without having a middle ground. Okay. So we're here today and we're still looking for money, aren't we? And we're still going to go back home and look for what to eat and pay bills and stuff like that. So, but we're here and we can make sense of things and really not crumble into one corner and as if the world is about to end or there's gloom hanging over us. So that is, being in a good mental health space. Now, how can we help people, knowing that, positive mental well-being is a combination of feeling good and functioning well, ability to find meaning and purpose, your ability to connect with other individuals and have a productive conversation, and make sense of yourself, the feeling of optimism, self-awareness. And I mean, self-awareness, saying, for instance, if I don't get 7 hours of sleep, I cannot work 8 to 5, So that is a strength, but also that's my weakness, and it's okay to own all of that. Now, if someone begins to disengage, they don't talk as much. They're losing weight, or they're talking to you, but it's yes, no. Sometimes people lose the ability to make connection. I have seen in the clinic that some people stop brushing their teeth, they stop having a shower. Some people don't even take care of their hair because they lose interest in nearly everything that used to be fun to them. Then that is the problem.
So
That
doesn't
is
it mean that the
what
person have actually slid into depression?
yes, they're heading that way because they're disconnecting from, basic self-care, and some of them either eating too much or not eating at all. So any extreme can be a symptom. Again, we're very fond of, you gained weight, you're losing weight. Some of those statements need to slow down. Are you pregnant? What's going on? Very detailed questions like that can
Are you
also be a
married?
spike. But when you start observing things like that, you agreed to meet at 5 o'clock. They were nowhere to be found. They don't pick their phones. And some people would be extreme, outburst of emotion, and some people could be sarcasm. So someone would just overboard explode, anger outburst. Or some people just they smile and they laugh about everything, that kind of way. So
True.
any extreme can be a clue into something deeper. Now I often say, that being said, any mental health expert will tell you this, but you don't go around diagnosing people just because you have these few facts. A lot of times they're comorbid with each other. So I'm disconnecting, but I'm eating, comfort eating. I'm not picking my phones. I have lost touch with a lot of people. I'm unable to go to work, to the point where I have been, given a warning of being sacked at work and stuff like that. So there are a lot of pointers to, the beginning of mental health struggles that we need to be aware of.
Awesome. Now, seeing that all of this happening, all what is happening these days, like the news that you hear these days, the reports on war, coups, insecurity and insurgency, whether on the mainstream media or on social media, and even the inflationary pressures that deal with a lot of people's mental health, like the amount you normally budget to get household items, you go back to the market and it has surged by 100%. Most women at that point just want to feel like ripping off their minds and their hearts immediately. Because I was actually talking to a guest and he once stated that all of us are not normal, especially when you begin to see all of these reports and then of kidnappings and killings and all of that, and then you now say that your mental health is sound, then it means that there's a problem. So how can one maintain a sound mental health with all of this sad news flying around? Because no matter how much we want to look away, they're always there.
And you see, that is a normal part of living, unfortunately, that, we're not all going to be happy. The governments are all going to be behaving right. And, you have your full provision. Remember that even the human need as an individual, my needs are insatiable. However, we're talking about even the inability to meet regular basic, essential needs. But how I work around it is identifying what you can and cannot control.
Okay.
And there's so many things that we can't control. You see, the environment is one, but what you're made up of is another, and the internal drive. So I talk about the internal and your external locus of control. What can I control? I cannot control the fact that prices are going up, but I can control how much of my day the thought of that consumes. It's nearly saying, and sometimes as Africans, we're getting too used to "Ego better," "Ibe or any of those, words and things that we say to make ourselves feel better. But what can I control? I can control what I have right now and how much I can stretch it,
Okay.
right? I can control how much of my time that I allow that to consume. I can ask for help. I can try again. I can decide how I respond to challenges. I give you an example. If I go, oh, this color, like, my God, how dare you? I'm like, oh, maybe she likes it, or maybe it's not her thing. Do you get what I mean? So the way we look at situations turn out to impact how we begin to feel about it. And that could either make it easy to deal with or lead you downhill. So it's response rather than or more than what is happening. And I'm not saying settle for less. Do you get what I mean?
Okay.
But have the time. What I've seen consistently is that a lot of the things we're afraid of that begins to trigger, a negative mental well-being eventually resolve itself. Gone downhill. So it's really taking one day at a time. If I were talking to a client, I say, break it down into blocks. So all we're worrying about is this week and then next week. And while we're doing that, we're trying to figure out strategies that could help us cope and find alternatives to what is happening. War is going to be there. Remember, we came out of COVID and then there was war, and now there is inflation around, as a result of the war, and on and on and on. We don't know what's coming next. And because we don't know what's coming next, it's okay to also say, you know what, while we're here, how can we survive here so that, you're not thinking your entire life, because that's a huge picture and a very uncertain angle to be looking at things, So that's how I say it. Split things into what you can control and what you can't control. Whatever you can't control can wait.
Oh, wow. I like that part. We're actually due for a break, but before we go on that break, now, I'd like to ask you, as therapist, we know that you address issues and feelings that your clients are dealing with. And in some cases, these problems are so ingrained in a person or a family that they can cause, or they can be caused by what is called transgenerational trauma. But before we get into transgenerational trauma, kindly help us to get a deeper meaning of what trauma means, especially in a mental health setting, either the big T or the small t, like therapists usually call it.
Now, again, I must reemphasize the fact that nothing is diagnosed in this world until we've looked at it. And isn't it funny that that's what keeps people away? We don't even want to know. It's like finding a lump in your breast. You refuse to check because you're afraid of the C word, right? But it could just be a lump, it could be anything.
It could be anything.
Yeah. So that's the same thing with, going to have a mental well-being check, or even sitting by yourself. I always say to people, once a week minimum, sit with yourself, see where you've been, see where you're going, see your real dreams outside when you're meeting with your friends and trying to do the yo-yo thing, and be honest with yourself. Are you indeed happy? If you are, good. If you're not, how can we fix things from the inside out? Because it's not the you that we see that matters, it's the you that you see behind closed doors. Sure. So essentially, what I'm trying to say is, before we go to trauma, right? Let's go back to say what happened. So a child wasn't well provided for. And we could say, okay, it wasn't the parents' fault. Look at the economic situation within the socio-economic background, right? And then this child, in the bid to provide for themselves, got raped on the street, right? And there was no avenue to deal with that. And for a long time, what we do is, if a child is raped, how were you dressed? How did this happen?
What were you looking for? What were you doing there?
Exactly. We don't talk about it. So there is no debriefing. There is no helping that child to make sense of that pain. So that on top of the lack of provision, and then maybe they got pregnant, and then dad and mom sent them out of the house because now they are an embarrassment to the family. And then maybe he had to end up with, the one who was responsible for that pregnancy. And then that one who was responsible for that pregnancy became an abuser. Now they couldn't go to school because they had to mind the baby. And then, things get harder and harder and harder. And you see that eventually, even though someone doesn't want to be a damaged or bad or sad person, a combination of situations have led to this point. So shock. So trauma is like, you got hit by a car. How does your body feel?
Okay.
Right? So that for me is the progression. It is not just one thing. It could be one thing, but how that one thing unveils and unravels, because now it is a combination of a few sad events leading to that point. So and again, when this happens one generation, I had it, I pass it down to my children pass it. It becomes what we call transgenerational or intergenerational trauma. Those two words are used interchangeably,
Clearly, Esther Abbah has a lot to unbundle in this conversation. We would get right into it after this time out. Please stay.
There's a difference between being an organized person, being a tidy person, and being OCD. So
is there anything wrong with being OCD then?
There is everything wrong because you cannot function normally. People who have OCD, depending on how it manifests, some of them can't hold a job, because imagine trying to repeat to your general manager what they said to you. So you say, I should go to the market, Abby. And then you go to come back and you have to repeat 5 times, or you have to repeat 3 times. Very rarely is it 3 times, sometimes 5, sometimes 7, sometimes 10. And until they've completed that cycle, they cannot move forward. So there is something wrong with it. And it comes with a lot of anxiety. Some of them don't sleep well. Some of them are in constant state of fear, or even a combination of all of this. So it is a disease, unfortunately.
If you just joined us, this is The Conversation. We are reaching you from Kaftan's television studio here in the nation's capital, Abuja. If you just joined us, you've actually missed out on a whole lot, but then you can still join in the conversation. Our guest on the show today is Esther Abbah. She is a therapist, and we've been talking about mental health. All right, before we went on that break, we actually talked about a lot of things, but then you've actually helped us to understand transgenerational and intergenerational trauma. So now, for a lot of people, they don't even know what it is. They've never heard of transgenerational trauma or intergenerational trauma, because I actually did a survey and a lot of people are asking, what is that exactly? But you've helped us to explain a bit of it. So now, what are the risk factors, the causes or the examples that you can actually put on in terms of explaining transgenerational trauma, and how does it even show up in families?
So starting from the basic, which is trauma, it is an emotional response to a terrible event, right? So like an incident, and an incident in a family could be poverty, it could be lack, it could be the fact that, based on certain underlying issues that weren't checked and so not resolved, people died early, so that becomes a traumatic event that happens. Some of them could be cultural, some of them could be spiritual, and I believe in them all, but it's how we deal with them. Okay. So that is true. Trauma could also be that as a result of lack, as a result of our socio-economic background, as a result of our biological composition, Because one aspect to this conversation that we are having is a possibility of genetic mutation and genetics, and what's going on the inside that we don't know. DNA comes into it, because there's chemical imbalances that happen. You know how I was explaining what happens if we're in a state for a long time and the body alters. When the body alters, everything alters to be in alignment with what's happening, So there could be chemical imbalances, but because, a lot of times, again, stigma and misconceptions, we don't have things changed. So transgenerational trauma is nearly saying, it's the same as saying, I want to build a lasting wealth for my children and the children to come. So when you're in mindset, subconsciously, there are things that you should be working against to not transmit them to your children. Simple say, if I am the one who yells and have, an emotional outburst about everything and anything, what happens then is that my children learn that as a way of life and as a way of getting information across, So it's a learned behavior because that's all they see. So if me sitting back and not providing for my children and, thinking that everyone is on their own, they figure the way out. Emotional absence and lack of emotional connection, lack of providing essential basic needs, that is from the grassroots, can spiral things out of control. Because you see how I said, not providing, child is providing, they got raped, they got pregnant, they ended up with an abuser.
The abuser.
Now, this is going on. And unfortunately, we do not realize that a lot of those things have a way of repeating itself if we don't curb them. And that's why the basic but very, very packed up saying that whatever you don't have, you do what is within your power that your children have it. Whatever you learned late, you do what's within your power that to make sure that your children learn it early. Really saying, I'm not going to do you as my parents did me, especially when it doesn't turn out, if it's not the positive. And I often say to my clients that statements like that really come out of a place of pain, because people cannot give what they do not have. It's trying to repair that pattern one thing at a time, to say, if my father never worked, I'm going to see what's out there, whether the government employs me or I learn a trade, to make sure that first of all, I give myself what I couldn't receive from someone. And that way, when I've satisfied myself, I can now give that to someone else without feeling very sad and beat, and that's correct patterns to say, we want to do better than our grandparents did, than our dads did, and that our moms did, and hopefully that your children do better.
Great. So how can one heal from transgenerational trauma? Is it just with all where you just landed? Is it just trying to do better? Does it actually end there?
Exactly. Well, does it actually end there? I don't know. It's a continuum. But how about even starting with that? Because once the light turns on, then we can identify what's in the wrong place. Because first of all, we've come out of darkness. And you see, the human brain, we couldn't completely explore it. One thing leads to another, and you can not imagine the freedom and the revelation that you get from just making that intentional decision to not repeat negative patterns.
All right. Now, so I get that you specialize in transgenerational trauma, stress, and anxiety. What is the connection between these three?
Not really specialized in transgenerational trauma. I fell in love with that, and that is because I'm Nigerian. I was raised in Nigeria. I'm grateful, extremely grateful to the upbringing that I have. However, I have seen a lot, even people living abroad because they brought some of those dysfunctions here, that the parents who live abroad but won't buy milk, but they're building a home in Nigeria in their father's compound where the children would never go. Things like that. I have young Nigerian children in clinic who have been damaged by, the same beatings that their fathers gave them. They give to children right now as we speak. They make children go out and fend for themselves, and that in that kind of way. So I'm seeing a repeat of patterns that I don't like, because the pattern that worked in 1975 can in no way work in 2022.
Absolutely.
So it's triggering that thought in my mind. What is this? How can we fix it? And even bringing it down home to myself, So now, stress and anxiety and transgenerational trauma, again, is a progression. If you're exposed to stress and you're exposed, as a result, exposed to anxiety, and whatever comes with that you can't function, you can't make sense of things, you become depressed, you use anger as a way of expression and outlet. Of course, you're going to pass that way of life to your children. It will take a supernatural intervention for your children to not pick that up. So stress is your body's reaction to threat. Say, for instance, if you are in a car and the driver is driving at such a high speed, all of a sudden you start to palpitate, and you nearly sweaty hands, and that kind, you become a bit anxious. So that's your body's reaction to threat, because what your nervous system is saying to your brain is, okay, the car is going at very fast speed. The brain is interpreting it. We can get crushed and die. And so you become anxious as a result of that stress. So anxiety is the reaction to stress. Stress is the reaction to threat. So if there's a threat, or like there's a snake in the room, you begin to panic and you feel this, goosebumps all around your body. So there is a threat in your environment. So the body, and your nervous system and the brain starts to work. Do we escape? Do we stay here? What if we get beaten? What if we die? And all that thought progresses to a point of anxiety, and anxiety manifests in different ways. And then over a long period of time, if left unattended, becomes a mental health situation or condition. And if unattended, that's if you survive it. But if you don't survive it, the people you leave behind get to pick up the pieces. And that's unfair.
Well, so how about obsessive compulsive disorder? That's the OCD. Can you walk us through that mental illness briefly?
So OCD, there is probably not one thing that causes it. But from what I have seen in clinics, happens if someone has been raised in a very rigid environment, can be a trigger for obsessive compulsive disorder, right? So OCD is a situation, and it's another term that people use so flippantly and unapologetically. Some people say, oh, I am so OCD. But in reality, they haven't a single clue as to what real OCD is like. Because the people who are caught in this circle do actually suffer a lot. So OCD is maybe when someone has a particular pattern that they're very obsessed about. Some people very obsessed about cleaning, so the compulsion is the thought that keeps coming. If you don't clean your hands, you're going to die, you're going to catch bacteria. And so they're washing. You actually would see people who wash their hands to the point of bleeding, or to the point where, it's scratching. Or some people, it's, I have a client who, if she goes through a road bump, she has to go back and check that she hasn't killed someone.
Oh,
She has
wow.
to go back, and she has to go back 5 times. So you have people who have to have their food lined up in a certain way. There are people who have to color coordinate. So it manifests in a lot. And for some people, it's counting. And for some people, it's repeating themselves. And however it manifests to them, if it's 5 times they're counting, they have to repeat the same sentence to you 5 times. So very rarely the people who say, oh, I'm so OCD, actually don't manifest any of that. And with this comes a lot of stress and anxiety, and panic. They couldn't be relaxed. So that's what OCD is. I used to say, oh, I'm so OCD, but I'm not OCD. There's a difference between being an organized person, being a tidy person, and being OCD.
So,
So
so is there anything wrong with being OCD then?
there is everything wrong because you cannot function normally. People who have OCD, depending on how it manifests, some of them can't hold a job because imagine trying to repeat to your general manager what they say to you. So you say, I should go to the market, Abby.
Oh.
And then you go to come back and you have to repeat 5 times or you have to repeat 3 times. Very rarely is it 3 times, sometimes 5, sometimes 7, sometimes 10. And until they've completed that cycle, they cannot move forward. So there is something wrong with it. And it comes with a lot of anxiety. Some of them don't sleep well. Some of them are in constant state of fear, or even a combination of all of this. So it is a disease, unfortunately.
Oh, wow.
Because it captures your mind. It holds. I always say it is a monster that lives inside your mind and lies to you so hard, but you believe it so hard because if you don't do what it says, it's nearly like it's going to kill you.
Oh, wow. All right, now since we're also observing the 16 days activism to eliminate gender-based violence, now you talked about someone who is raped or what they go through. For a kidnapped victim or someone who has gone through one attack or the other, no matter how minor it is, even for someone who has gone through rape or sexually abused victims or honor killing, domestic violence of any kind, the psychological effect will definitely register in their head, and it's usually difficult to live for a long time. Because I actually got testimony from a friend who talked about how he was kidnapped a few days ago. He stayed 8 days in the kidnappers' den. So when he was giving the testimony, like, you could feel the palpitation, you could feel the anxiety. I'm trying to find the right word for it. Like, if you touch him, even before you come close, he's almost like jerking. And so how can you actually help such victim who in terms of helping their mental health and put them in check? Because I'm sure someone is watching us right now who is going through such.
It is a very sad thing. I don't think that anything else bigger than that would be how to characterize that as not a trigger for a mental health situation. To be held captive outside your own will, that you love or claims to love you, or it's as good as having a diagnosis and coming out of it. But in this case, it becomes your reality for a long time. And sometimes, and may I say in particular, young people, when a young person gets abused or raped, subconsciously speaking, they already are guilty that they allowed that happen. But how do I allow myself get raped? If it's either consensual sex or it is rape, there is no middle ground, to that note. And say if someone has been held captive, I mean, look at that word captive. I didn't want to do this, and then you did this to me. Imagine the level of stress that they went through, and the anxiety and the fear and the panic. And sometimes it comes of this not really knowing what just happened. Their body is in shock for a long period of time. Now, how can we help them? It's making sure that we give them the emotional, the psychological help, and sometimes the spiritual support that they need to come through the situation. A lot
Okay.
of times when tragedies happen, I hear people say things, that is worse and make it sound like yours is even better. This happens. And what you're trying to say to that person is what they're feeling in that space and time is a lie.
Oh, wow.
And that only cause conflict internally.
Mm.
It's like when you lost someone and someone comes and tells you, aren't you lucky that you lost your parent at this age? Because I didn't even meet mine. But you cannot understand what you don't have or experience. So you lost yours at a young age, but I lost mine now, you know? And there is no undermining each person's experience. I often say this, right? If someone say, if you tell me waka, it's painful, just take it. Don't do it. Because the next thing is, what's that? How many times they told me this and trying to invalidate what people feel. That one thing is the big fear why people don't trust people to
Okay.
talk around. Because if I know that when I come to talk to you, you would listen, just and validate me, it's enough. One of the proponents of the theories that we use is say something that every client or every individual has the capacity to resolve their own problems. So when I come and I start pouring out to you, it's not necessarily that I'm stupid or that I want you to fix it. It is the fact that I've bottled up for so long and I haven't found one person to listen to me. So the first thing is, let's learn the skill of being present,
Okay.
just being present, and helping people validate their feelings, because to them it is real, and to them it is as big as the mountain and as wide as the ocean. Let's not try to undermine people when they start talking. One thing that is common is when you start narrating a sad experience, someone comes with something a bit bigger than what you're saying, and you can't even finish your story. So again, how can we help them? Each individual is different. How about saying, what can I
Okay.
do to make you feel better today? How about you went to visit them and instead of narrating long stories of all the sad experiences that you've heard about and people have told you, you brought food and you say, let's eat. How about saying, did you have a shower? How about saying, do you have any dirty clothes that I can bring home and wash for you? How about saying, let's go out for a walk? Just bring them outside of
Out.
that environment, because that environment, while they're sitting there by themselves, believe it or not, yeah, and that experience lives with them. And to come out of it, we have to create new experiences. I always say to my clients, while you're having a panic attack and you're just sitting there and thinking, oh my God, is it going to come? How bad is it going to be this time? If you have enough strength and the courage to even walk outside and open your door, then your neighbor is out there and you have to say hello, otherwise it look weird. And the next thing, someone drives past and then you're thinking, oh, it's chilly, oh, it's sunny, oh, it's this, and your attention comes to other things rather than sitting down there and thinking it's going to come, and you could be waiting there for 5-10 minutes. It might or it might not come. So
Okay.
it's bringing people out of that environment to create a different experience or to have a different interaction, even if they come back, because at least weren't sitting down with the same experience for an hour, especially if it's a negative experience. So that's what I always say. Be present and be genuine. And I often say to people, if you can't keep your mouth shut, if you cannot empathize and validate what they're feeling, don't go. Don't go. But sometimes it's
Absolutely.
not just what you say, your body language. Imagine someone narrating a horrific experience and you're looking at them because you think someone else has been through worse.
Absolutely spot on. Now, our time is fast spent, but we'd like you to quickly ask you two questions, and I'd like you to quickly unbundle them in one breath now. So how can one, with all of this, how can one actually regain their self-esteem and confidence? And on a final note, we'd like to get your last words to those who are suffering from one mental health challenge or the other.
How can someone regain their self-esteem? I would say yourself from the external pressures and, stressors, and go back in and ask yourself, who am I? By yourself, and try to build on that. Say, for instance, I don't have a job, which I'd like to, dress up nicely and go to job, but I don't have that, but I have a skill and it's something to work with. I am a kind person. If I'm not a kind person, why? Because life experiences might have altered, the way I've learned to react or to deal with people. So bring yourself to a place of honesty where you find your strength and your weaknesses and build on that. And be genuine that, your locus of control isn't how I want to be seen, how I want to perceive and all of that, but who you really want to be and the resources that are available to you to make that happen. And don't have a tunnel vision. It shouldn't be just black and white. If we mix black and white, what can we get? And sometimes being content, is a great thing. And who knows how you can step up from there to actualizing your real and your true self. I need you to repeat. Okay, my last word to people suffering mental health disorder. If you have symptoms of, your heart is always racing, you can't get out of bed, you're unmotivated, you have sad feelings glooming around, days on end, weeks on end, for even maybe obvious reasons. Prices are skyrocketing and all those things. We all need help. I often say, if you have typhoid and you go see a GP, if your eyes hurt, you have headache, your tummy runs because you've eaten the wrong thing, then is that basic that sometimes your mind needs to be checked as well? Seek the help of a professional. Ideally, your GP would be, or your doctor should be, your physician should be the first person that you go to explain these symptoms over a period of time. And they can be a psychologist or something like that. And then if you need to go to talk therapy, then it's time to seek help and talk to a professional, because they will be able to go through what you have within and the situation that is going around and help you figure out coping techniques and coping mechanisms to be able to deal with whatever you're dealing with. And the other side of it is, it will be great for people to not use mental health terms so flippantly, because what happens is that it scares people in the environment to be empathetic and to be understanding, and to believe and to accept your own journey, that although it is tidal, we are all progressing. So see a doctor when you can. A mental health diagnosis is not the end of the world. You don't have to go in a psychiatric home. You don't have to have medication. Like I use the example of a lump in the breast. It could just be a lump. I see people that sometimes they come into clinic and by the third or fourth session, it's like a scale came off their eyes, So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're stuck or it becomes a label on you forever. So check yourself, talk to someone who can help you walk through that season of your life, and you can come out whole and better.
Thank you so much, Esther Abbah. It's been a wonderful time having this conversation with you. We've actually been rightly schooled. Thank you so much for your time.
So much for having me.
Awesome. All right, viewers, that's all we can take on the show today. We have been chatting with Esther Abbah. She is a therapist, and I'm sure that you must have been rightly educated, entertained, and informed. Now, always remember that childhood trauma can actually lead to an adulthood spent in survival mode, afraid to plant roots, to plan for the future, and to trust and even to let joy in. It's a blessing to shift from surviving to thriving. It's not simple, but there is more than survival. And that's the last quote I will leave it with. Till I come here again from the nation's capital, Abuja, I am Annabel Oji. God bless you and yours. God bless Nigeria.